Picture Switzerland, and pastures come to mind first. Cowbells. Snow. Quiet villages tucked into the mountains. But beneath all that postcard perfection, there's a layer most tourists never see. Over the last 60 years, this country has quietly built the largest bunker network per capita on Earth. By law, every resident has a guaranteed spot underground. Enough space to hold more people than actually live here. It sounds like paranoia. But for the Swiss, it's something older. Long before banking and precision watches, this was a patchwork of isolated alpine valleys. Survival meant retreating into the mountains whenever armies passed through. That instinct never really left. It just got poured into concrete, tunneled into mountainsides alongside old military fortresses. And yet on the surface, life carries on as always. Wooden chalets. Quiet farmland. The calmest place in Europe. Underneath, though, it's also been preparing for the one day it might not be. Twice a week, before most tourists are even awake, farmers set up stalls right along the river to sell what they picked that morning. Lucerne sits at the heart of Switzerland, where the Reuss River flows out of Lake Lucerne beneath the shadow of Mount Pilatus. Its medieval chapel bridge, the oldest wooden-covered bridge in Europe, has watched over this city for over 6 centuries. Its painted triangular panels, telling stories of saints and Swiss history to anyone who pauses to look up. On misty autumn mornings, the bridge seems to float above the water, its wooden beams dark with centuries of damp. The only sound is the gentle lap of currents against its stone piers. The water beneath it shifts between emerald and steel gray depending on the sky. On clear mornings, the bridge's reflection trembles alongside the distant Alpine peaks. To To stand at its center is to feel the city breathing around you, the gentle clatter of trams on the lakeside promenade, the murmur of German and Italian and English mixing in the air, the smell of fresh bread drifting from a bakery tucked into a cobbled alley. Lucerne runs on that kind of rhythm, quiet and orderly, even in the middle of a busy tourist city. Locals here take punctuality seriously, treating it less as manners and more as basic respect. On Sundays, much of the city goes still, with shops closed and streets noticeably quieter than any other day. Then February arrives, and that same order completely disappears. Fastnacht Carnival takes over, kicking off before dawn with a burst of noise called the Ürthknall. Brass bands in painted masks march through the old town for days, playing loud, deliberately chaotic music. For locals, it isn't a scheduled show. It's closer to organized spontaneity, built entirely on collective energy rather than a fixed script. Residents swim directly in Lake Lucerne, often at a restored 19th century bathing area just minutes from the train station. Now, before we move on to the next destination, here's a fun question for you. Which dish is traditionally associated with Switzerland? Comment your answer below. Only about 6,000 people live here year-round. For a few weeks each winter and summer, that number multiplies several times over. Almost nobody arrives by car. Zermatt banned motor vehicles from its streets decades ago. People get around on foot, in electric taxis, or in horse-drawn carriages that still clip along the main street in winter. That main street is Bahnhofstrasse, lined with shops, cafes, and bars that stay busy into the evening. Behind some of those storefronts, wooden houses from 500 years ago are still standing, part of the old Hinterdorf quarter, tucked into the middle of town. Guiding tourists through the mountains has been a formal job here since 1858, when local guides organized one of the earliest associations of its kind in the Alps. That tradition still gets celebrated every October on the first Sunday of the month with the village's annual Guide Festival. Spring brings a different kind of parade, when herds of goats are walked through the streets, a local tradition residents look forward to every year. Food culture runs deep too. Close to 100 restaurants sit in the village, with another 50 scattered through the mountain huts above it. Fondue and raclette show up on most menus, but family-run places up in Findeln serve their own take on Alpine cooking, drawing regulars back season after season. During the busiest weeks, the crowds show. Longer waits, fuller streets. Come back in the quieter months, and the same streets feel almost like a different town, slower and mostly local again. The world is full of amazing places waiting to be discovered. Subscribe and let's explore them together. Long before skiers and climbers ever arrived, this valley ran entirely on dairy farming and quiet mountain routine. Grindelwald was first recorded in 1146, a small farming settlement tucked into the Bernese Alps. For centuries, its economy revolved around cattle, with hundreds of dairy cows supporting the village's cheese-making traditions. The mountains surrounding it, the Eiger, Mönch, and Jungfrau, were treated mostly as obstacles, not attractions. Locals farmed beneath them without much interest in reaching their summits. That changed almost overnight in the mid-19th century, when English travelers began arriving with a different idea entirely. They hired local guides to attempt peaks nobody had seriously tried before. The Wetterhorn fell first in 1854, followed by the Eiger itself just 4 years later. Then, in 1892, disaster struck the village directly. A massive fire tore through Grindelwald, destroying over 100 buildings and leaving 400 people homeless in a single afternoon. Strong winds carried sparks farther down the valley than anyone expected. The community rebuilt quickly, and tourism kept expanding right alongside it. In 1908, Grindelwald opened the first cableway ever built in the Swiss Alps. Four years later, that same ambition pushed further, tunneling straight through the mountain to reach Jungfraujoch. Engineers called it the top of Europe, and the name stuck ever since. Even now, the valley still carries traces of both identities, a working farming village that quietly became one of the most visited places in the Alps. If you enjoyed this journey, you can support the channel with a small coffee. Your support helps me keep creating more travel videos like this. Thank you so much! Under the surface of the modern city, timber piles from Neolithic huts still sit sunk into the lake bed. That's how far back Zurich's story actually goes, thousands of years before Switzerland existed as a country. Romans arrived around 15 BCE, building a customs post they called Turquoise, right where the Limmat leaves the lake. That river crossing eventually grew into a real settlement, and by 1218, Zurich had become a free imperial city. Then, in 1519, everything shifted again. A preacher named Ulrich Zwingli launched the Swiss Protestant Reformation right here, changing the city's religious identity almost overnight. Waves of religious refugees followed in the years after, many bringing textile skills that reshaped the local economy. By the 19th century, that same city had transformed again, this time into a center of machine-driven industry. Banking eventually took over from textiles, and Zurich became one of the most important financial centers on Earth. Today, UBS and Switzerland's Stock Exchange both operate from right here in the city center. Even something as ordinary as drinking water reflects that same obsession with precision. Over 1,200 public fountains sit scattered across the city, most fed directly by natural spring water. Locals still drink straight from them without a second thought. Food carries its own local twist too, most famously in Zürcher Geschnetzeltes, sliced veal simmered in a creamy mushroom sauce. Even muesli has roots here, first prescribed by a Zurich doctor in 1904 as a health food for his patients. I'm curious, what time is it where you're watching from? And which country are you joining me from today? Six villages share this one valley, and each still keeps its own customs even after centuries of shared history. Lauterbrunnen sits at the base, joined by Wengen, Mürren, Grindelwald, Stechelberg, and Isenfluh in one municipality. That community traces back to Walser settlers, who by 1346 had already built self-governing farming hamlets here. For generations, life revolved entirely around dairy farming, with cattle moved seasonally between the valley and higher alpine pastures. That rhythm still continues today, even with tourism now sitting alongside it as the valley's second economy. Alpine cheese is still made by hand each summer, using wood-fired cauldrons in traditions barely changed over time. At the end of the season, farmers gather for something called a geesteilet, dividing that summer's cheese by old custom. It's part celebration, part accounting, and the whole village usually turns out for it. Fondue remains a daily staple here too, often made with a mix of local cheeses and a splash of white wine. Some visitors even hike with what locals jokingly call a fondue backpack, cooking pot and all. Music carries its own history in this valley, with alphorns once used by shepherds to call across long distances. Yodeling served a similar purpose, a practical way to communicate before anyone thought of it as folklore. Both are still performed at summer festivals, alongside flag throwing and traditional costume parades passed down for generations. Wengen hosts its own cheese festival each year, where visitors can become a shareholder in an actual wheel of Alpine cheese. Religiously, most residents belong to the Swiss Reformed Church, joined more recently by Catholic families from Portugal and Croatia. In 1859, a Swiss businessman on a work trip stumbled into the middle of a battlefield, and nothing about his life stayed the same after that. Henry Dunant found wounded soldiers left with almost no care, and he spent days helping however he could. That experience stayed with him long after he got home to Geneva. Four years later, he helped found what became the International Committee of the Red Cross, and the First Geneva Convention followed within a year. That single idea turned this city into something unusual, a place governments send their disagreements instead of their armies. After the First World War, the League of Nations chose Geneva as its headquarters, and construction on the Palais des Nations began soon after. When the United Nations took shape following the next war, it kept Geneva as its European base too. Today, the city hosts around 40 international organizations and hundreds of NGOs. Centuries before any of that, this was Calvin's city, and his version of Protestant reform shaped how people were expected to live, dress, and spend their time. Some of that discipline still lingers in the city's reputation for precision, most visible in its watchmaking houses. Living here comes at a cost. Prices here rank among the highest of any city in the world, though salaries and services tend to track close behind. Out on the lake, a single fountain sends water nearly 140 meters into the air, visible from almost anywhere in the city. It's Geneva's way of doing something ordinary, moving water at an extraordinary scale. In the heart of the old town, a river bends so sharply it nearly encircles the whole city on its own. That's the Aare, wrapping around Bern in a loop so tight the medieval builders used it as a natural wall. Founded in 1191, Bern's old town layout has barely changed since, its narrow streets still following that original river bend. Locals still swim that same current straight through the middle of summer, floating past centuries-old buildings without a second thought. Six kilometers of covered arcades, known locally as Lauben, shelter shoppers from rain and snow year-round. That network is considered one of the longest weather-protected shopping streets anywhere in Europe. The Zetglage clock tower still marks time the same way it has for centuries, complete with astronomical dials most visitors don't fully understand. In 1353, Bern joined the Swiss Confederation, becoming one of its founding members early on. By the 16th century, the city had embraced the Protestant Reformation, reshaping its religious and cultural identity for good. Then, in 1848, Bern was chosen as the capital of the newly unified Swiss Confederation. That role brought a different kind of culture into the city, formal, political, but still deeply local. Cafes and cellar bars fill the arcades after dark, many tucked below street level in centuries-old stone vaults. According to city legend, a duke went hunting nearby in 1191 and named the settlement after the first animal he caught, a bear. Since 1480, Bern has kept live bears on display at the city's own expense, a tradition that continues today at Bären Park. Locals still call them Mutzen, an affectionate nickname passed down through generations, tying the city back to its own founding story. Two lakes meet at this town, and boats have been the easiest way between them for over a century. Paddle steamers with red and white flags still cross Lake Thun today, including the Blumlisalp, built in 1906 and still running most summer weekends. Lake Brienz keeps its own steamboat too, the Lochberg, built in 1914 and nicknamed the Jewel of the Lake. Both boats carry passengers the same unhurried way they always have, past villages that barely changed shape in 100 years. One of those villages, Iseltwald, sits on a small peninsula jutting into Lake Brienz. For most of its history, almost nobody outside the valley had heard of the place. That changed suddenly a few years ago, when a Korean drama filmed scenes on its wooden pier, and fans started showing up by the boatload. Locals still fish from that same shoreline in the quieter months, largely unbothered by any of it. Back in Interlaken itself, hikers gather before sunrise most mornings, backpacks loaded for trails that start right at the edge of town. Within an hour, a good pair of legs can trade cobblestone streets for a ridge looking down on both lakes at once. Locals call this stretch of the Bernese Oberland one continuous playground, connected by rail lines, cable cars, and lake crossings that all meet back in town. By evening, the same boats that carried hikers out in the morning bring them home again, decks a little quieter than they were at dawn. The last boat of the evening docks well after dark, its lights the only motion left on a lake gone completely still. Every fish swimming up the Rhine eventually hits a wall it simply cannot pass. That's the Rhine Falls, where the river drops 23 meters across a width of 150 meters. Only one species manages to get past it. Eels slip out of the water entirely, sliding sideways over wet rock until they reach calmer current upstream. Everything else stops here, unable to climb the falls no matter how hard they try. The falls themselves are surprisingly young by geological standards, forming only around 15,000 years ago. Melting glaciers at the end of the last ice age carved a new channel through solid rock. Erosion and weathering shaped that channel further, eventually creating the waterfall seen here today. At the center of it all sits a massive rock pillar, splitting the falls into two separate streams. During peak summer flow, roughly 600,000 liters pour over the edge every single second. That makes it the largest waterfall in Europe by both width and flow rate combined. High above the water stands Laufen Castle, first recorded all the way back in the year 858. A glass elevator inside now lowers visitors straight down toward the thundering water below. Boats still ferry tourists close enough to feel the spray, stopping right beside that central rock. A smaller version once existed further upstream too, until it was dynamited apart between 1908 and 1912 to improve river navigation. Would you take a boat ride this close to Rhine Falls? Comment 1 for yes, or 2 for I'll stay on shore. Long before 5 interlocking rings became its symbol, this city already had famous residents, just not athletes. Voltaire, Rousseau, Victor Hugo, Charles Dickens, and the historian Edward Gibbon all spent time living in Lausanne at different points. The university they might have walked past dates to 1537, one of the oldest in Switzerland. Sport arrived here almost by accident, tied to a war rather than a stadium. In 1915, with much of Europe fighting, a French baron named Pierre de Coubertin needed somewhere neutral to base his young Olympic movement. He chose Lausanne, and the International Olympic Committee has stayed headquartered here ever since. It took until 1994 for the city to formally earn the title Olympic Capital. Today, it also hosts the Court of Arbitration for Sport and roughly 50 international sports federations. Every January, dancers from around the world compete in the Prix de Lausanne, held in the country's largest theater. Getting around the city means riding a driverless metro, small enough that Lausanne is often called the smallest city in the world with one. Nightlife concentrates in 2 districts, Flan and Oeschinen, both busy well past dinner most weekends. None of this erased the city's older identity as a center of learning. Alongside the university, the Polytechnic School Appenzell was founded in 1853, and both still shape daily life here. Around 140,000 people live in Lausanne itself, though students and researchers make the city feel considerably larger. We gather info from many sources. If something seems off or you've got more to add, drop a comment. In 1901, engineers built one of Switzerland's most photographed structures without ever using scaffolding. It rises 65 meters above the valley near Filisur, a viaduct of 6 limestone arches stretching 136 meters across the landscape. Instead of scaffolding, workers lifted each stone pier individually using a mechanical lifting device. It was considered a huge architectural feat for its time, unusual even by early 20th century standards. Construction took only about 18 months, finishing in 1902 at a cost of 280,000 Swiss francs. The bridge leads directly into solid rock, connecting seamlessly with the entrance of the Landwasser tunnel. That alignment let trains pass from bridge to tunnel without any real change in gradient. Engineers designed it that way on purpose, working around some of the most difficult terrain in the Alps. It forms part of the Albula Line, a stretch of railway now recognized by UNESCO as World Heritage. In 2008, that recognition made it one of the first railway lines in the world to earn that status. For over a century, the Rhaetian Railway has owned and operated the viaduct continuously. In 2009, engineers finally repaired the structure for the first time since it was originally built. Even now, the viaduct still handles around 30 passenger trains a day, over a century after the last stone pier was set. Some villages are built beside the mountains. Mürren was built right onto them, wedged onto a rocky terrace at 1,650 meters above the Lauterbrunnen Valley. No cars have ever driven its streets since the cliffside terrain makes road access physically impossible. The only ways in are by cable car or mountain train, both winding up from the valley floor below. Walser settlers first built the village in the 13th century, and it was formally recorded in writing by 1257. For centuries afterward, Mürren stayed a quiet farming community, largely unknown outside the region. That changed in the late 1800s, when aristocrats and painters began arriving in search of Alpine scenery. By 1930, Switzerland's very first ski school had opened right here in the village. A year later, the British Ski Association held the first Alpine World Championships for slalom and downhill on these same slopes. Sir Arnold Lunn, a British skiing pioneer, helped shape those competitions during his time in Mürren. Today, around 400 residents live here year-round, making it the highest permanently inhabited village in the entire canton of Bern. The Schilthorn cable car above the village remains one of the longest aerial cableways anywhere in the Alps. Each January, the Inferno race sends skiers hurtling from the Schilthorn summit down to Lauterbrunnen, one of the toughest amateur races in the sport. Even now, the same three peaks that framed that Bond scene, the Eiger, Munch, and Jungfrau, still dominate the view from almost every street in the village. Old Town shopkeepers in Thun climb an extra set of stairs just to reach their own front doors. Medieval planners built the main street here in 2 levels, stacking raised sidewalks above the road itself. That unusual layout still shapes daily life on Obere Hauptgasse, where boutiques and cheese shops line both levels today. Above it all, 4 rounded turrets mark Thun Castle, standing on the same hill since the 12th century. Berthold V of Zeringen built its tower between 1180 and 1190, and it still looks much the same. Down below, the Aare River splits the town in half after pouring straight out of Lake Thun. Wooden sluice bridges span the water, originally built to help control the river's flow through the city. In summer, surfers now ride a standing wave that forms beneath one of those same bridges. Even the town's name carries old roots, coming from a Celtic word for a fortified settlement. People have lived on this exact site since the late Stone Age, long before any castle existed. Twice a week, market stalls fill the main square, much like they likely did centuries ago. East of the old town, Shadow Park opens up along the lake shore, styled after an English garden. From its towers, Thun Castle still offers the same view it always has, red rooftops below and the Bernese Alps rising behind them. Legend says a white crane landed here the moment construction finished, and the town took it as a sign. That crane became the emblem of Gruyeres, still appearing on flags and signs throughout the town today. Long before tourism, this hilltop belonged to the Counts of Gruyeres, a noble family recorded in archives as early as 1244. Their castle, built in the 13th century, followed a square fortress design imported from the House of Savoy. Inside, thick stone walls and corner turrets protected a family that ruled this region for nearly 3 centuries. That rule ended abruptly in 1554 when the last count, Michel, went bankrupt and lost everything. His debts were split between the towns of Bern and Fribourg, ending the county entirely. The castle changed hands several more times before finally becoming a public museum in 1938. Down in the village, the main street has stayed remarkably consistent, cobblestoned, car-free, and lined with houses dating back centuries. No chain restaurants or fast food outlets have ever been allowed to open here. The town's name eventually gave itself to something far beyond its own borders: Gruyere cheese. Local wheels were once transported to Vevey, loaded onto boats, and shipped as far as Lyon in France. Today, a cheese factory just below the town still produces it using methods refined over generations. Historians use its name to describe an entire era of European history. In 1857, the lake here dropped low enough to expose thousands of ancient objects near a spot called La Tène. Archaeologists ended up naming a whole Iron Age culture after it, one that once stretched from Ireland to Ukraine. Long after that, in the harsh Jura winters, local farmers had little to do but repair broken tools indoors. Once the first clocks arrived, they started taking those apart too, and eventually learned to build their own. That's how an entire industry started. Farmers turned watchmakers, working out of houses built with workshops attached to the living rooms. One of them, Abraham Louis Breguet, was born here and went on to found a watch brand still considered among the finest in the world. In 1967, a research center in Neuchatel built the world's first quartz wristwatch, changing the entire industry within a decade. Down in the valley of Val de Travers nearby, distillers gave the world absinthe, the drink everyone eventually just started calling the Green Fairy. People here still speak French with a particular pride, often calling Neuchatel the most French city in all of Switzerland. Above it all sits a castle dating to 1011, home today to the local government and to a ghost story locals still tell without much embarrassment. Two mountain peaks near here are connected by nothing but a 100-meter suspension bridge, swaying above a drop most people don't dare look down at. That bridge is called the Peak Walk, opened in 2014 as the first of its kind anywhere in the world. It links Sex Rouge with a neighboring viewpoint, both sitting close to 3,000 meters above sea level. Beneath it stretches the Zermatt Glacier, part of what this entire mountain complex is named after. Getting up here doesn't take long at all. A cable car covers the climb from the valley floor in just 15 minutes, gaining nearly 3,000 meters along the way. That cable car system dates back to 1957, when it first opened access to what had been a remote glacier. At the summit, a striking building designed by architect Mario Botta now serves as the main viewing station. From its terraces, 24 peaks above 4,000 meters come into view on a clear day. The Eiger, Mönch, and Jungfrau all appear from here, alongside the unmistakable shape of the Matterhorn. Even Mont Blanc, France's tallest peak, is visible far off in the distance. In winter, skiers drop down runs like the Combe d'Odon, gaining over 1,000 meters of elevation in a single descent. Huskies pull visitors across the snow on guided dog sled rides, even in the middle of July. Despite sitting above 3,000 meters, the whole summit remains reachable within an afternoon from towns like Gstaad or Montreux. At exactly 4 in the morning on a Monday each year, every light in Basel's old town goes out at once. That's the start of Fasnacht, when lantern-lit drummers and pipers flood the streets in painted masks, and the city barely sleeps for the next 3 days. Nearly everyone in the old town pauses their normal life for it, work and school included. The tradition runs on medieval guild roots, and it's now recognized by UNESCO as part of the world's cultural heritage. Basel earns its calmer reputation the rest of the year, split neatly in two by the Rhine. Gross-Basel holds the old town on one bank, Klein-Basel the newer, livelier side on the other. 6 bridges connect them, including the Mittlerer Brücke, one of the oldest river crossings anywhere in Europe. In summer, locals do something visitors rarely expect. They jump straight into the Rhine. People float downstream in ordinary clothes, towing a dry bag to keep their belongings from getting soaked. Academic life runs just as deep here, since the University of Basel, founded in 1460, is the oldest in Switzerland. Erasmus taught at it, and centuries later, so did Nietzsche. Modern Basel built its economy on medicine instead of banking, home today to Novartis and Roche, 2 of the world's largest pharmaceutical companies. Roche's headquarters tower rises 178 meters, the tallest building anywhere in the country. Every June, the city's identity shifts again, art collectors filling its hotels for Art Basel, one of the most important art fairs on the calendar. Divers exploring a cave system near this lake have mapped nearly 2 kilometers of underwater passage and still don't know where it ends. That mystery sits behind the Sierenbach Falls, tumbling down a cliff on the northern shore of Lake Walensee. The falls drop 585 meters across 3 separate stages, ranking among the highest waterfalls in all of Europe. Their middle stage alone plunges 305 meters in a single, uninterrupted fall. At the bottom, that water merges with the Rinkel, a spring fed entirely by an underground karst system. Researchers have been diving into that cave network since 1953, tracing tunnels that stretch far into the mountain. Around 3 kilometers in, the passage splits, and from there, nobody fully knows where the water actually goes. The lake itself formed in a long, narrow basin between the Appenzell Alps and the Gruyeres Alps. At its deepest point, Lake Walensee drops 151 meters, holding water so clear it often looks more turquoise than blue. Locals sometimes compare its steep, fjord-like shoreline to something more Norwegian than Swiss. Long before tourism, Romans used this lake as a trade route connecting Italy to the rest of Switzerland. Near the Sierenbach trailhead, the remains of a small Roman-era castle still sit close to the water. Villages along the shore, like Quinton, remain accessible only by boat or on foot, with no road reaching them directly. That isolation has helped preserve a mild microclimate, allowing fig and even palm trees to grow along parts of the lake. On a steep hillside above Lake Geneva, grapes get sunlight 3 separate times before they're ever picked. The sun hits the vines directly from above, then bounces back up off the lake below, then radiates out from stone walls that absorb heat all day long. Monks first built those walls in the 11th century, when Benedictine and Cistercian monasteries controlled this stretch of land. Over centuries, they carved more than 10,000 narrow terraces into the hillside, some barely wide enough for a single row of vines. Laid end to end, those stone walls would stretch beyond 400 kilometers. The vineyards now cover nearly 30 kilometers of shoreline, from the outskirts of Lausanne to the Château de Chillon. In 2007, UNESCO recognized the entire region as a living cultural landscape, still shaped by the same methods monks once used. Within the terraces, 2 names stand above the rest: Dézely and Calamine, both classified as Grand Cru vineyards. Dézely marks the exact spot where those original monks began their work centuries ago. Chasselas remains the defining grape here, a white variety that has shaped the region's identity for generations. More than a dozen small villages sit tucked into the slopes, connected by narrow paths winding between the vines. St. Sapharin is one of them, its stone alleys barely wide enough for 2 people to pass. A small blue and yellow train, the Train des Vignes, still climbs through the vineyards from Vevey in just 12 minutes. For centuries, people living near this ice were terrified of it. Starting in the mid-1600s, villagers organized processions and prayers, even planting stone crosses at the glacier's edge, hoping to stop it from swallowing their fields. It didn't work. The Aletsch Glacier kept advancing for another 2 centuries, burying forests and farmland as it grew. By the mid-1800s, it reached its largest recorded size, longer and thicker than it had ever been. That's also when attitudes shifted, and the glacier stopped being feared and started being studied. Today, it's the longest and largest glacier in the Alps, formed where 4 smaller glaciers converge at a single point, called Concordiaplatz. At its deepest, the ice runs close to 900 meters thick, roughly the height of 2 Eiffel Towers stacked together. All that ice eventually melts into the Massa River, which carries it down toward the Rhone Valley. Since 1870, the glacier has lost close to 2 miles in length, and the retreat keeps speeding up. Scientists now expect it could lose half its remaining volume before the century ends. None of that has stopped people from wanting to walk on it. A suspension bridge, built in 2008, now lets hikers cross the Massa River and reach both sides of the ice. Near the glacier's edge sits Villa Cassel, once a summer retreat for European politicians and financiers escaping their own capitals. This lake has no river flowing out of it, at least none anyone can see. All the water that pours in from 4 different glacial streams somehow disappears underground instead. It seeps straight through the same debris that created the lake in the first place. Around 3,200 years ago, a massive slab of rock broke off the Doldenhorn and slid into the valley below. That landslide, along with others nearby, sealed off a natural basin and let meltwater collect behind it. The result was Oeschinen Sea, ringed today by the same peaks that helped create it, Bloemleysalp, Frundenhorn, and Doldenhorn among them. A cable car now carries visitors most of the way up from Kandersteg, followed by a short walk to the shore. The Berg Hotel there has been serving hikers since the late 1800s, one of the oldest buildings on the lake. People still row out onto the water today, or cast a line for the char and trout stocked underneath it. High above all of it, the mountain hasn't finished moving. A slope known as Spitze Stei has been sliding for years, sometimes shifting centimeters in a single day. In quieter years, engineers just monitor it, but sudden accelerations have forced trail closures more than once. Tens of thousands of cubic meters of rock have broken loose in a single event before, with more expected eventually. It's the same process that built this lake in the first place, just moving slowly enough, this time, for people to watch it happen. For now, the water below stays exactly where it's always been, turquoise and still, waiting on whatever comes down next. Deep inside these cliffs, something far older than any Swiss village left its mark. Bones found in these caves date back 90,000 years, left behind by cave bears that denned here through entire ice ages. Traces of Neanderthals turned up too, roughly 40,000 years old, among the oldest signs of human presence found anywhere in the Alps. The caves themselves sit high on Ebenalp, the northernmost summit of the Appenzell Alps. A cable car covers most of the climb, but the last stretch has to be done on foot, straight through the rock. Walking through, the path passes from daylight into darkness and back out again before reaching open cliffside. From there, a guest house built directly into the mountain clings to the rock face, its back wall formed by the cliff itself. Below it, the land opens into rolling green hills, unusually smooth and treeless for terrain this high. Centuries of grazing kept the forest from ever coming back, leaving grass instead of trees across most of the range. Further along the ridge, 3 small lakes sit tucked into folds of rock, each one reflecting the peaks around it almost perfectly. One, called Sea, rests directly below the highest point in the range. That peak, Santis, climbs to just over 2,500 meters, sharp enough to stand out from the rounded hills surrounding it. Switzerland has a way of staying with you. Not because of the views, though those are unforgettable. Not because of the chocolate, or the clocks, or any of the things it's famous for. It stays with you because of how it feels to be there. It's a place that doesn't need to shout. It just exists, calmly, steadily, beautifully. And honestly, that's rare. Worth traveling for. Worth remembering.